All the great plays. All the great players. All the great games. Strap on your helmet. This is the award-winning Football Friday.
That intro is 30 years old, but my goodness, it still slaps. That was just one of the iterations for Football Friday, WRAL's long-running high school football highlights show. For 35 years, starting in the early 80s, former WRAL sports anchor Tom Suitor was the host. And I'm not overstating it when I say he set the standard for high school football coverage. For his contributions to high school sports through Football Friday and the Extra Effort Award, Suitor was inducted into the NC High School Athletic Association Hall of Fame and the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, which is rare. There aren't many media members who get that honor, but the reason he is in can be explained by his commitment to the community.
The Triangle has the most unique landscape for sports. 3 major universities along Tobacco Road with rabid fan bases, a Stanley Cup champion, an NFL team right down the road, and heavily invested transplants. Not to mention an interesting mix of sports teams that were. Joe Ovies brings you a brief history of Triangle sports, a candid conversation with those who help shape why sports matters here.
In the days before ESPN was widely available and the worldwide leader you know today, local sports coverage on television had to balance the national stories with the ones that were happening in your backyard. That gave Tom Suitor, a true pioneer in the Triangle, a wide range of things to cover, which is probably best illustrated by this farewell piece by the great Bob Holliday.
Hello, Americans. This is Tom Suitor.
Oh, the places you've gone, the people you've seen. John Wooden, Dean Smith, Bill Cower of State, Coach K, Mike Jaminski, Edwin Moses, who hurdles.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Suitor. Welcome to the 4th annual Great Raleigh Road Race.
Think of the stories you've covered in style. The Cardiac Pack and its magical run.
All right, I've got with me Coach Jim Valvano.
Minneapolis, Minnesota. What a moment for Duke.
Duke knows to have the chance to win 2 straight NCAA championships.
NCAA titles for State and for Duke. Carolina as well. You've covered big events near and far.
The future of East Carolina football. The influential media of New York City.
The Colts are leaving. Can you believe that? What is Johnny Unitas saying right now? He's probably saying boo.
Think of the fun you've had on TV. Drum roll, please. How about a tune?
You know, they called him Flipper.
It takes a team to put out the product each night on the news, but sometimes things happen to those on the news.
Oh, look what's coming in.
Get your script straight, Tom. What if they don't roll the tape?
Are we going to see that tape? And we didn't see that either, but believe me, Joe Carter went boom, just like that, and it was over. Go to the tape!
Even recording audio takes concentration.
Rounds will be held Tuesday and Wednesday with the...
Just tag it, Tom. We got to go home.
Tom Suitor, Action Sports Spot.
Enough of that. You've got things to do, schools to visit.
From Sky 5, Tom Suitor.
This is the Extra Effort Award, and we are awfully, awfully proud to present it to you.
The award you present spans 2 generations. Hundreds you've honored for brains and for speed. Think how many names you've called on TV.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Suitor. We are back for the 25th year of Football Friday.
Oh, the places you've gone, the crazy things you've done.
We're gonna make it after all.
You have made it, Tom. You've earned the right to kick back.
Good thing I'm about to retire.
Do it, hurry.
So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye, goodbye.
Now, Suitor's real legacy was his contribution to high school sports. And not just making the games a big deal, but also highlighting the best from the communities these games were being played in. Here's the wild part about your career, Tom. 45 years at WRAL, and you started as someone who didn't know anything about television at all?
Joe, I knew absolutely nothing. When I started at RAL, 1971, June 2nd, I walked into the building, didn't know a thing except how to turn the set on. I graduated from college on May 23rd, 1971, had my interview with the great Ray Reeve on May 25th. They hired me on June 2nd, and I went to work.
Well, what was your first gig?
That was it.
So you just did sport. You got the job to do sports.
Yeah.
And that was that.
I was making $90 a week, so they weren't going to lose much.
All right. So for what was sports coverage in as somebody who didn't know anything about TV, you basically get a blank canvas. So what was sports coverage?
Well,
I
was working with Lou Bellow and Ray Reeve. Now,
Okay.
Ray Reeve was a Hall of Fame broadcaster, the best play-by-play guy I ever heard. I grew up listening to Ray Reeve and Rocky Mount do football, basketball on the Tobacco Radio Network. Worked with Bill Curry. It was great. But Ray knew nothing about TV. Ray was doing radio on television. He was just reading. The camera was on him, and he was reading. Never looked up.
Okay.
But he was an old radio guy, and Lou Bellow was an old referee who was hired because he had a great personality, which he had. And so the first time I saw Mr. Reeve at work officially, he said, "Tommy, there's not a hell of a lot to do around here." And I was hoping he was going to bestow his vast knowledge on me, so we sat there a lot. And here was an eye-opener, Joe. Earl Edwards retired as the football coach at NC State, and Al Michaels was going to take his place.
Okay.
So we went to the press conference. WBT in Charlotte called and asked if we could send them the film, because back then it was film, black and white film at that.
Jeez.
And so Mr. Reeves said yes. And so we went over there and shot it, and we came back, and I said, "Well, aren't we going to use some of this?" And Ray said, "No, we'll just get it off the wire." So we sent the film to WBT, and we didn't use any of it. Things were so different back then.
That's okay. That's fascinating, because the impression that I've always had is that college sports has always been a big deal, right down to even...
Well, it was, but see, things were so with film, it had to be processed. It was black and white. It was just very. I got in. It was kind of like the beginning stages of anything.
Okay, so you're covering sports, and you're covering the height of some basketball. We're talking about the David Thompson era,
right,
at NC State. We're talking Dixie Classic.
Well, I'll tell you this. One time, Mr. Reeve had retired. Lou had left the station. I was the only person in sports making $110 a week. And Duke was playing a home basketball game, and State was playing a home basketball game. And I wanted to get those covered. You wouldn't believe the doors I had to knock down to get us to send a crew to both of those games.
Really?
And this is 1972. Things were different.
Interesting.
When I went to work at RAL, there was no 6 o'clock sportscast.
So when did that change? When did the light bulb go on that this was important?
Jim Goodman felt like we needed a sports presence, and I was the only person in sports from October 72 until September 73, and they brought Nick Pond in. And Nick had worked at WRAL previously. And so they brought him in, and they gave him 3 minutes at 6, and gave Nick, and I was working in the mornings then.
So Mr. Goodman saw the larger picture about
Right.
sports and how it brings the community in. And
Jim gave me a spot when I was the only in February of 1972. Gave me like a minute.
Okay. Which was
a
that's a lot of time.
Well, not. Listen, I worked all these years to get lots of time.
Okay, fair enough. I was gonna say, because folks might not realize this, but like TV time is not normal time.
Right.
If you get 90 seconds in a news broadcast,
Well,
that's
see, at 11 o'clock for many years, I got left 5 minutes.
Wow.
And I would beg for more.
Wow. 5 minutes. I'm sure
I'd get 19, 20 tapes in. Everything was boom, boom, boom.
That's great. That is great.
One of the directors says, "Tom, you're not on camera." I said, "That's the point. Nobody wants to see me, but they want to see what's going on."
All right, so you start to cover what we would assume is the bigger ticket items: college basketball, college football. So when did you start to think about, all right, well, football is, as Mr. Goodman had pointed out, look, sports is an important part of the community. Well, let's take it down to another level. Let's take it to the high school level. When did you start to get the idea behind Football Friday and covering high school football?
Well, in the 70s, in 74 and 75, Nick and I did a Saturday morning high school show. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't doing it on the newscast. And the show consisted of, we sent a photographer and shot one game, and then we had 4 coaches as guests.
Okay.
And we did that for a couple of years, and we had pretty good response, but it wasn't really covering a lot, but we were interviewing 4 coaches, talking heads, which was somewhat, on television. But it was good. It was okay.
Okay.
And then I took over when Rich Brenner went to Chicago, and I learned more about television from Rich Brenner than anybody I ever worked for. So when Rich left, I took over, and Bob Holliday came over from Chapel Hill, WCHL. And I remember one of our first conversations, I told Bob, I said, I think we can do more for high school athletics. There's a market out there that's untapped, and if we go for it, we can really expand our audience. And so Football Friday, so in September, we decided we were going to cover some high school football. Now, our coverage started with like maybe 3 games and a lot of scores.
Sure.
But in 1983, it really began to turn. A guy named Keith Baker, who's one of the best photographers in the country, is still a news photographer at WRAL. He was just out of Athens Drive High School. He came to me and said, Tom, I want to learn how to shoot video. If you can get me a camera, I will go shoot high school for you. And if it's not any good, you don't have to use it. But it's, and I said, okay. So I got Keith to do. So Keith got him a camera and he went out. Then Richard Atkins, who's also one of the best news photographers in the country, he was just out of Athens Drive. He said, if I want to do what Keith's doing, they were working on the studio camera crew. I want to be a photographer. Okay. So Keith and Richard came out, and then others wanted to do it. So in 1984, I got a letter from the High School Athletic Association saying, your coverage of Friday night was the best we have ever seen. Okay. We covered like 10 games.
And because at that time, you're probably getting a story in the newspaper on a Saturday, right? I mean, because high school football coverage in the newspaper has always been around. Yeah. That's how a lot of beat writers get their start. They work these high school games.
Right.
You get the blurb in the paper the next day. So to actually be there with cameras to get primetime coverage was a big deal for these high schools.
It was, and we were going into places, and we still, and Bob Holliday will tell you this, we think that WRAL was able to get Edgecombe County in our viewing area for our coverage of Tarboro, Southwest Edgecombe, and North Edgecombe, because we went a lot down there. They weren't in our market in the 80s. Early 80s, but we got them in our market
because of the high school football coverage.
That's what Bob thinks, and that's what I think too.
I mean, I could see that. I could see that. So, at its height for Football Friday, how many games would you cover?
We covered as many as 30.
So you were sending photographers to.
Now the key was, Joe, that one photographer shot 2 games, and sometimes 3, depending on the start times. That was the fun part, was putting together the show and how can we do this.
Well, that's what I was going to get to, because I'm thinking about this in terms of modern technology. Okay, where if I want to send something back immediately, I can do it over Wi-Fi, cellular, whatever it is. You are physically sending bodies out with cameras and tape.
Yes.
To outer reaches of the viewing area.
Well, here's how we did it.
How would you get somebody back in time, turn that tape around, and get it on the show?
Well, here's how we did things. Let me go back a little.
Okay.
So we were doing Football Friday basically in a newscast up until like 1989. What we would do is we would get like 17 games in about a 5-minute period. We just show 1 or 2 plays, boom, wipe,
Here's a touchdown, here's a score.
And so in 1988, I was out with my voice problem, and I missed that high school football season. But I was thinking, I said, when I come back, we need to do a 30-minute show at 11:30. So I proposed that to Paul Quinn, who was our assistant general manager. He thought it was a great idea. I said, you can sell it. We can do all kinds of things. So in 1989, we started doing the 30-minute show. We were covering 27, 28 games. It was great. And here's what you would do. So Bob would send me a list of games. And I would look at the games, and I'd call him up. Sometimes our conversation was like an hour. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And sometimes I'd say, hey, this looks great. And we'd assign the photographers, and I always tried to have like 6 packagers with like Jeff Gravely or DJ Kazmerzak or Bob, Jay Jennings.
Joe, you say Jay's probably up there, right?
Yeah, and so that's how I would divide the show. I'd do 2 voiceovers a package, 2 more voiceovers a package, and there were 3 blocks. And it was so much fun. And people who worked on Football Friday when it first started, They loved working on football for Friday. Everybody would stay around for the show. It was like a big party. It was so much fun. And the first time I knew that the 30-minute show was working, I was at the airport. I was going to fly to Rochester, New York. No, Niagara Falls for my brother-in-law's wedding.
Okay.
So I was in the airport, and these little kids just came up to me and said, Tom Suitor, Football Friday. And it'd been on maybe for a month.
Sure.
And I knew that, God, we got something going here.
Yeah.
And I've done Final Four specials. I've done all kinds of stuff. Nobody ever comes up and says, Tom, that was a great Final Four special you did in Minneapolis in '92. Mm-hmm. But they'll come up and say, Tom Suitor, Football Friday.
So I guess this is for somebody like me who grew up in South Florida, and I've lived in North Carolina since 1995, but I've lived in Cary. I lived in Raleigh. I haven't lived out in Rocky Mount or Tarboro or those types of locations where the community is clearly different. Smaller communities, families that have been there for a very, very long time. So, you're doing this obviously to extend the reach of WRAL, but what did you learn about a place like Tarboro and football where they take football so seriously?
Well, what we learned, and I knew this growing up in Rocky Mount, WRAL's most loyal viewers aren't in the Triangle.
Okay.
They are out in Johnston County, in Sampson County, Edgecombe County, Nash County, Person County, Vance County. That's like today I can go to Whole Foods in Raleigh, which I go to a lot, and nobody looks at me. But I could go in the whole, Harris Teeter in Smithfield, and
sure.
That's Tom Suitor. and this is, I've been gone for almost 6 years.
Yeah.
But that's where our friends are. And we made friends going to a high school, covering games out there, Joe, because if you went to Sampson County, the news crews, it's usually because of a murder or a tornado or something bad. We went down there with positive coverage. Mm-hmm. And kids would tell me, said, we run home after the games and gather somewhere and watch Football Friday.
Well, that for a lot of these kids, that's their moment. They're not going to go on and play college football. They're not going to be in the NFL. And this is their moment, and they get to be on TV.
Well, see, playing high school sports meant a lot to me. Mm-hmm. It got me through. I went to a prep school up in Asheville, Christ School.
Okay.
And it was a tough place. And I was only accepted when they found out I could play ball.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
And so it meant a lot to me. And just going out into the hinterlands, as we used to call it.
Sure.
It just made the station a lot of friends.
So were there games that you would assign different importance to? Like, would you send Sky, like if Sky 5
yes,
showed up
we'd always talk about that. And, the Sky 5 game of the week.
Yeah.
And they'd cover 2. We always tried to cover 2 because the key to Football Friday, as far as I was concerned, was how many games we got in.
Sure.
Where we were. And we would try to get into every county in our viewing area. Mm-hmm. And Sky 5 would be, Bob would call me and say, why don't we do this with Sky 5 this week? You're fine. And sometimes we'd cover 3 games with Sky 5. One of the best Sky 5 packages ever. Jay Jennings was in Wilson, and he was taken off because we had to get back to the station. And Hunt, I think, had just defeated Fike for the first time. And the people running onto the field, and they got that from the air. It was so
wonderful.
Cool.
And I'm sure the communities also thought, oh, okay, Sky 5 is here, so the helicopter has arrived. That means we've arrived.
People would announce it, and it was a big deal.
Okay,
it was a big deal. And you ask about how we got things back then. Mm-hmm. They were driven back.
Well, this is where Bob Holliday likes to tell everybody, and he's told me this story several times. Shout out to Bob, that Drive 5 was invented with high school football.
Yes.
Because you had to drive these things back.
Listen, I hear him talk about Drive 5 in the weather coverage. I started that. One time we did an extra effort award, and it was Walk 5 because we went to the old Cardinal Gibbons from the station.
That's right.
So, and you know who shot that?
Who shot that?
Billy King, the former Duke All-American defensive. Yeah, he was our intern.
Okay, that's funny because, I went to Cardinal Gibbons and I graduated from the old campus.
Yeah, we walked to the old campus. So I said, well, today it was a Walk 5 over the car because they always wanted you to say Sky 5.
Of course. You're covering as many games as you can. Did you hear from high school football coaches that got jealous of where they were placed in the show, or why do you keep showing up to this particular school with the helicopter? What kind of feedback did you get from the coaches?
The feedback we got from the coaches was also positive.
Okay.
They just appreciated the fact that we were doing it.
Okay.
And one time, one of my photographers was I think like in Goldsboro somewhere, and the assistant coach came up to him and said, every coach in Eastern North Carolina watches this show.
Okay, why would they watch it, though?
Just to see what other teams do, what their conference rivals do, to see, one time Rocky Mount was playing a team from Fayetteville in, the playoffs. And we did an extra effort award at Rocky Mount, and the coach told me, he says, we feel like we know Terry Sanford from watching your show. We know the names that you called out. Yeah, yes. We've seen it so many times.
So high school coaches will watch this, totally understandable, but this probably opened up recruiting access for colleges as well. I'm guessing NC State, Carolina, Duke, Wake Forest are watching this coverage.
Oh, they were all aware of the show.
To maybe see, hey, maybe go check this guy out.
Well, one of the biggest boosters of Football Friday was Mac Brown at Carolina.
Who's always been a huge proponent of high school football in the state of North Carolina.
Right,
period.
and he sure has recruited North Carolina over the years pretty well. But he, I didn't know Mac Brown. Well, actually, you want me to get into this story about?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, in 1992, Football Friday was going along real well. It just won several awards, But David Letterman was coming to CBS. The announcement was made in 1993. He was going to start in September of 1993. And I was like, oh, my goodness, because the first thing I thought about was that WRAL was going to get a lot of pressure from CBS to air David Letterman at 11:30.
Yeah, this was August 30th of 1993 when he debuted on CBS. WRAL at that time was a CBS affiliate.
Let's just say CBS would put pressure to do that.
Got it.
And so I went to our general manager and I said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Letterman's coming. What are we going to do with Football Friday?" And he said, "Well, we may not do it." And I said, "We may not do it." He said, "Well, we may not." And
you couldn't push it to I guess pushing it to 12:30 would be too late?
Way too late.
Yeah, okay.
Way too late. So I immediately called Ken Browning, who was the head football coach at Northern Durham at the time, the longtime assistant coach for 5 coaches at Carolina.
Yeah.
And Ken had just come off a state championship, so I called Ken and said, "Listen, they may cancel Football Friday." Ken loved the show, too. And so Ken said, "What can I do to help?" I said, "Well, if you can get some people to write letters." So he called, and so he got all of these coaches to start writing letters.
Yeah.
And they were coming in. And so I ran into Mac Brown over at Carolina on the elevator at the Smith Center. I was covering a college basketball game, and I didn't know Mac Brown knew me from Adam's House Cat, because he's Mac Brown.
Yeah, but you're Tom Suitor on TV. Come on.
Yeah, but he's Mac Brown.
All right, fair enough.
Well, anyway, so Mac says, "Tom Suitor, I want to tell you that a Football Friday show you do, that's the best high school football show I've ever seen." I said, "Well, Coach, thank you so much." He says, "That is so good. Our staff watches it every Friday night." And I said, "Oh, God, thank you, Coach." I said, "But they may cancel the show." He says, "Cancel Football Friday? They can't cancel Football Friday. It's the best high school football show I've ever seen." I said, "What can I do to help?" I said, "Well, if you wrote a letter, it would really help."
Okay.
So he wrote a wonderful letter. And about 4 or 5 days later, the general manager comes down with a letter in his hand and says, "Tom, you can call off your dogs. We're going to do the show."
And the rest is history.
It's history.
Right. Come on, you're telling me Mac Brown didn't know who you were?
Well, I didn't think he did.
Well, see, this is interesting to me because, and we'll get back to high school football here in a little bit and the evolution of it all, especially with college athletics getting into the Friday night territory. And I know this caused problems with Steve Logan, the former ECU coach. But, Jeff Gravely has told me about the Coach K sit-downs that would happen ahead of the Final Fours or things like that. Clearly, you had relationships with these coaches in order to do things like that. So this wasn't always the case with long-standing coaches in the area?
What the
So you have a unique relationship with Mike Krzyzewski.
Well, I did his TV show the first 4 years.
Yes.
He was at Duke, and before he was really Coach K.
Yes.
And I think he appreciated the fact that I was supportive of him when he was catching a lot of flack. Could he do it? And blah 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 blah. And and it was a lot of fun doing that show with him.
Okay, so but for other coaches that have kind of come through the area, it was just, hey, it's Tom Suitor on TV.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was. Now Sidney Lowe was different because I covered Sidney as a player,
Yeah.
and he was one of my favorite players. As a matter of fact, we would go talk to Sidney after a game because Val Vanna would do his act, and then Sidney would break it down for us.
Very nice, very nice. And again, I'm referencing something that's in another podcast episode, the one that features Jeff Gravely, but Jeff loves to tell the story about how he got essentially an in with Michael Jordan when he was taking Tom away from basketball, and he was with the Birmingham Barons, and they came to Five County Stadium, which is not the Five County Stadium that you see today. And when Jeff went up to Jordan and said, look, I'm Jeff Gravely with WRAL, he goes, how's Tom Suitor doing? It's like Jordan remembers you.
Well,
Come
see,
on
what was great back then, Joe, was you got to know the players in the '80s.
Yes,
it was ESPN was just getting started, and locally is where the players at Carolina, State, Duke, they watched us,
and they were here 3 to 4 years.
Yes,
there was just a continuity to it that not just affects the product on the court, but it also affects the relationship that the television say, or we here at the radio station have.
Well,
with players.
as you know today, there's so many sports information offices back then wanted to help you. Like over at State, Walt Atkins, who was an assistant SID back in the 70s, he would call me and say, hey, Tom, we got State Carolina swimming tonight if you're interested. Just anything to promote it. And now I think sports information directors protect their coaches.
They're gatekeepers.
Yeah,
because they have the ACC network.
Rather
they
than
have their own media
they have all of that.
Yes.
In local outlets, it's kind of they're not as important as getting on ESPN.
Yeah.
But back then it was different.
Whereas the ACC has its network, high schools don't have their own network.
Well, and here's the thing. See, not only did I want to do just high school football, I wanted to do some high school basketball, soccer, just to do as much high school as we could, but not infringe on what we were doing with the colleges because that was our bread and butter.
Sure. But there was, my guess is that you were getting much more impactful storytelling out of something like the Extra Effort Award.
The Extra Effort Award, people have asked me about that, and if I had known the Extra Effort Award was going to still be around 41 years later.
What was the genesis of the Extra Effort Award, which we still do at WRAL?
Well, it's very funny. I just taken over as the 6 and 11 sports anchor Monday through Friday, and the news director Steve Grissom had done something similar in Florida where he was news director. And they wanted to call it the Tom Suitor Extra Effort Award. And I was like, no, I'm not calling it that. And it was always the Tom Suitor Extra Effort Award, but not one time did I ever say that on the air because it was embarrassing.
All right.
And Bob said, Tom, I'll set them up and you go do them. And so I said, well, all right. And that's how it started. And I tell people and I've run into people like in the 80s who'll say, hey, I was one of your Extra Effort winners. And I say, God, you got cheated because we didn't know how to do the stories in the 80s, but we got better at them as we went along.
What do you mean you didn't know how to tell the stories?
Well, what we did, this was hard, Joe. So a lot of times we'd take Sky 5 and we presented on a Thursday and it aired on a Thursday. So I would get back from Roanoke Rapids at 5 o'clock, and we had an hour news then from 6 to 7, and I went on at 6:45. But I had to turn the story and do my 6 o'clock sports.
I see.
And so it was tough. And then about 10 years later, we started, we still aired it on Thursday, but we'd do it on Wednesday. And then when I retired from the newscast and was just doing Extra Effort Award, I would spend hours on those things. I mean, I would go in, 11:30 in the morning. We might drive to Northampton County, drive back. I would stay there till 3 in the morning, putting that together to be edited the next day to air on the newscast.
And I would imagine when a school or an athletic administrator found out that one of their students was an Extra Effort Award recipient, I mean, I can imagine that there was a little bit of like, oh, WRAL is here. This is a big deal for the school. It's a big deal for the individual.
And when we started out, it was kind of like the Heisman Trophy. If you rush for 300 yards, you could win the extra effort award.
Sure.
And then we expanded it to extracurriculars, academics, and what have you. But one of the best extra effort awards I did in the 80s was with a kid from Warren County named Randy Jordan. Now, you may have heard of Randy Jordan.
The name sounds familiar.
He played at Carolina.
Yes.
He spent 10 years in the NFL, and now is the running back coach for the Washington Commanders. And Randy will tell you, and Jared Fialco back was doing during the COVID thing, when they weren't doing extra effort awards, where are they now? Randy said, I've been nominated for the NFL Man of the Year by the Oakland Raiders. I have been received lots of awards, but this first award, and he still has his plaque. They showed the extra effort award was probably the most important award I ever got because it gave me confidence.
Yeah, and that's why that's why I find it important to tell the story about high school football Friday and the extra effort award, because again, you're still figuring things out as a kid. You're a kid still in high school.
Yeah.
So to have adults nominate you, which shows like, oh, they're paying attention. They think what I'm doing is good. And then to actually get that recognition from the big stick that is WRAL. I mean, yeah, that's going to have an impact on somebody. I'm not surprised that somebody like Randy would still think about that.
Lavelle Moten was an extra effort winner.
Yes. Yes.
And he still he gives a lot of credit to
hey, look, for those, Lavelle Moten, the basketball coach at NC Central, is a Raleigh guy. He's got so many Raleigh connections. He actually is somebody that a lot of people would like to see be a head coach in the ACC one day.
Gosh, Lavelle averaged like 37 points in high school.
Hey, he was legit.
Great.
He was legit. He clearly was legit.
But Jared did one of those where are they now?
Yeah.
And so he was seeing the video of him, and he said, look at me. He said, I wasn't even looking at the camera. I was so shy. He said this kind of gave him confidence.
No, that's great.
But we've had some great student athletes in this. I more than Football Friday, maybe the extra effort award. I think has had just as much, if not more, impact.
So with Football Friday, it kind of coincides with the evolution of the money that's been infused in college athletics.
Right.
And there's only so much television. There's only so many television windows for your best college football games. So there's been that creep. So college football only got to be played on Saturdays, right? Eventually, you started to get, for television purposes, Thursday night football.
Yes.
ECU and Virginia Tech really made a lot of strides in terms of television audience notoriety by playing these Thursday night games on ESPN. The MAC has its own little Twitter hashtag for MACtion when they play like on a random Tuesday night.
No.
But Fridays were always held out as
high school Friday,
no-fly
college
zone.
Saturday, NFL Sunday.
Yes. So even though there was creep throughout football in college and the pros, Fridays were left untouched out of respect for what high schools were trying to do. The NFL, that's a different matter altogether, but for colleges, you could really tick off high school administrators if you played football on a Friday.
Well, you could, because they thought it hurt the gate. Now, you and I have this, I always thought, now, if your kid's playing high school football, you're going to the high school football game.
I mean, look, that's a parent thing. For instance, like I'm not, as of this recording, I am not going to one of Coach K's final games because my son's playing a youth hockey game at the same time. I'm going to go see my son play hockey.
Right.
I mean, that's just what it is.
Yes.
So if the choice was, all right, well, ECU's playing on a Friday night and my son's football game is on a Friday night, well, I'm going to go to my son's football game.
Exactly.
So I never really understood the impact as somebody who was younger or didn't grow up around here. But this really affected the eastern part of the state, specifically Steve Logan, ECU's former football coach, where they agreed to play Friday night games, and this caused a schism.
I don't think any college coach really likes playing on Friday night.
Yeah.
Because they like to recruit on Friday night. They like to go see the games themselves, and they know it. Say, for instance, if a high school game is now on, I think Sinclair carries area high school football, and Clemson's playing Syracuse. I'm going to watch Clemson-Syracuse. I'm sorry, I am, and I feel bad about that. And that's going to hurt the high school gate.
Yes.
And I'm convinced of that. I remember Charlie Adams told me that John Swofford called him And
Charlie Adams is.
He was the former, longtime head of the North Carolina High School Athletic Association, and of course John Swafford, the ACC commissioner. And Johnny always tried to protect high school football on Friday, but he called and told Charlie, and this was maybe 10 years ago. He says, Charlie, I'm sorry, I can't. I've done all I can, but we're going to have to play on Friday night because the network, ESPN, is decreeing that we play on Friday night.
Yeah, they are paying you a lot of money.
And see, from my standpoint, I didn't like it because say if State or Carolina were playing on a Friday night, it would take away a crew that I could send out on Football Friday.
True.
And so I had to somehow finagle somebody else.
Also, if you're sending a crew out, you're also going to devote more time to that NC State North Carolina game on a Friday over a high school game.
Well, see, that's okay though, because that wouldn't interfere with the Football Friday show.
Okay.
Because we had the 30-minute show, and the State Carolina or whoever was playing would be fit into the newscast.
Okay,
but it would take away resources.
So it took away resources from what you were trying to do on Football Friday. And again, the coaches might not like it, but TV is going to dictate when you play.
It is, and that's the thing.
So how do you view that relationship now? As an observer, you're no longer in the business. You're officially retired. How do you kind of view that now?
Well, I'm still always will be a protector of high school football.
Okay.
Although I must tell you, I got to admit, if there's a Friday night game with Carolina or Duke or State or Clemson or somebody, I'll watch it. Yeah. I mean, I will.
Oh, that makes sense. And
I look forward to it.
People might not know this about what they're watching on WRAL right now is what is affectionately known in the building as Studio A.
Right.
Okay. Now, when I first came over to WRAL Capital Broadcasting in 2009, Studio A was an auxiliary studio where like Brain Game.
Well, we did Football Friday in there for years.
Okay.
We had bands and cheerleaders come in and players, and it was cool. For 10 years we did that in Studio A.
Those caller-driven charity events would take place in there.
They did car commercials in there.
Coats for the children, all that stuff, right? But there was wrestling.
Championship wrestling, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. And I'll tell you, Joe, when I went to work at WRAL in the early 70s, they taped that on Wednesday night. People were lined up all the way out to Western Boulevard to get in to see that. It was quite the ordeal. And I remember it was like 72. I was on the 6 o'clock news, and I was going up to put my makeup on. And so I went up there, and the wrestlers were up in the dressing room. And so I'm putting my makeup on, and all of a sudden somebody pinches me in the rear end. And I turn around, and this big old guy says, "I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else." And the following Wednesday, I went up at 2 p.m. and put my makeup on for the 6 o'clock news because I didn't want to be around those guys.
Did you know who any of these guys were?
Well, I used to watch it growing up in the 60s. There was George Becker, Billy Two Rivers. There was the great Bolo. There was Duke Kiamuka, the Gallagher brothers, the Blinder Hold.
Didn't Ric Flair come through?
Now, he was after the time I was interested in it. He may have. But here's what these wrestlers would do. They would come in on Wednesday and tape promos. And then they'd sit around and eat fried chicken and play cards and talk about how they were going to fix the match. I hope I didn't give any secrets away.
No. I think everybody understands the case. So Football Friday, clearly the focus, and that's what the show was built around. But the thing that I'm having a hard time processing is we love basketball so much in this state, and the relationship we have with college basketball and the recruits that have come out of Kinston and other places. Where does high school basketball fit in all of this? It's not like you weren't covering high school basketball.
Well, a lot of people, especially high school basketball players, would say, "How come you don't do a basketball Friday like you did football Friday?" And I said, "Well, the problem with that is that you all play several nights out of the week. Sometimes Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, and on football, it all came together on one night. Although now they play a lot of Thursday night games, which I hate. But anyway, that was back then, But we tried to cover on Friday night lots of high school basketball. We would, and it was easy. It's easier to shoot high school basketball because you can run to one game and get a couple of buckets from each team, and then you go to another game and get a couple of buckets. So we covered a lot of games on Friday night, and it was a lot of fun too. And I took pride in that.
But what about recruiting?
What about recruiting?
Well, like, you're covering football and you're doing the games and things like that. I feel like with basketball, maybe this is more of an extra effort award type story, but like the recruitment of David Thompson at NC State was a hot story. But was that a hot story for television?
Well, not back then because we were so in the, we had film and we didn't really cover recruiting that
Or
much.
Michael Jordan coming out of Wilmington.
Yeah, we didn't do that.
Interesting.
Yeah, we'll see. Now, I wasn't the main sports guy in 1980 when Michael was 80, 81.
Sure.
Yeah. But, and also you didn't hear about the high school players as much as you do now.
So do you think the high school for in your years of storytelling, do you think, we'll use Michael Jordan as an example of this, these are stories that you hear about after the fact, and then you would then send, okay, well, what is Michael Jordan's background? Like if you're as a college player, maybe you do a feature on him. Do you go back?
Well, we could get some video from somebody.
Okay, sure.
Probably call the station in Wilmington and
That
say, "Hey, you got a high school video of Michael Jordan."
Okay.
But high school basketball, before I got there in 81 as the main guy, we didn't cover a lot of high school basketball.
Gotcha. Okay. What do you think the biggest difference is now from, I'll use the 80s and the 90s when you were the main guy as peak television? Okay,
I call the 80s the golden age.
That's what I thought. Me growing up in the 90s with cable television was still the dominant form of how we got our information. Right. And broadcast television, clearly the big stick there. So I'm going to use the 80s and the early 90s as the golden era of that. So what's been, other than the internet, what do you feel is, the biggest change in how things are covered from that era to how we kind of go about things now?
Well, in the 80s and the 90s and for most of the 2000s, the sportscast had more time. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many battles I fought for time. Mm-hmm. I remember when I retired from the newscast in 2008, John Green, our former general manager, said a few words. He says, the thing I remember most about Tom is he was always concerned about time. He wanted more time. He was always in my office saying, I need more time. And I did. And now, see, here's the thing about a sportscast. A good sportscast can really enhance a newscast. It's not going to make the newscast. But it seems to me, and this is the way the station that had the best sportscast usually had the dominant newscast.
Okay.
Now, they say, and it's a consultant said, well, only 10% or 20, whatever, watch the newscast, for the sports.
For the sports itself, right.
But that 10, 20% add up, and I think if you make it fun, more people will watch.
Well, also, the sportscast can add context to what's going on for casual viewers.
Well, it can, and my argument was always, well, if the State Carolina football game draws a huge TV audience, obviously somebody's interested in it.
Right, that would be my argument. So you're packing, we'll use the Carolina Hurricanes, right? They're packing 16,000 people in that building, and there's a lot of people watching on television who either can't make it to the game or they can't afford to the game. You're packing 50-some-odd thousand people at a college football stadium. I mean, those are people who are clearly interested.
And you can't tell me that State Carolina fans, now especially in the 80s and 90s, they were going to, because we were basically the only people who were going to talk about it in the newspapers, of course. And the newspapers were great back then.
But you talk about the golden era, and I guess we can close the conversation on this. This is the part that I've always been fascinated by. 1983, NC State wins the national championship. Before that, 1982 with Carolina. Duke wins the national championship. What was that, 1991? 91. So they get to the Final Four, in 87? So
no, they got the Final Four in 86.
86.
They went to the championship game.
Yes, okay.
87, Indiana beat them in the Sweet 16, and Carolina, who was undefeated in the ACC, lost the ACC tournament. Lost to the personal fouls team of NC State, the ACC championship, and lost in the Eastern Regional.
Tom, this is the difference between somebody who didn't grow up with the internet and somebody who did. I can't remember squat. I Google everything. You keep it all in there, and it's amazing. It's one of the best things that from sports coverage from back then versus now is like I can't remember squat. So you could buy like a 1983 commemorative soda, a 1992
yes, I've got some
soda.
actually. I heard y'all talking about that the other night.
Oh, we have them
the other day.
We have them. But here's the thing: WRAL put out records.
Oh, we did.
You had a Wolfpack song. There was a Duke song.
Listen,
eventually.
the Wolfpack song was "They stole the hearts of everyone with showdowns in the West. They're North Carolina's Wolfpack, the best of all the best." And believe it or not, a lot of State fans were mad at that song because
Why?
they said we're North Carolina's Wolfpack.
I
Meaning,
see.
of course, the state.
The state.
But
come on.
you know how State fans
I know.
are.
Can't say North Carolina. It's NC State. So
Well, the '82 song, you want to hear that one? That was pretty cool too.
well, the funny thing is, I have the 45.
Oh, of the '82 song?
83.
Of '83.
I'm looking for the 82.
Well, the '80, you could probably, because Jay Jennings put together a photo essay. He
Yeah.
used to do those marvelous photo essays from '82. It's like the Tar Heels came to play in the NCAA.
Oh, I've heard
that
the song.
Georgetown team was tough, but not tough enough. Jimmy Black, the quarterback, he wants to win for Coach Dean. There's Governor Hunt. Aren't we glad he made the scene at the Superdome?
So who came up with those ideas? Who thought, you know what? These teams won a national championship. Let's make a song.
Well, in '82, John Green, our general manager, was a big Carolina fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so there goes the Carolina song. And then I think they figured, well, in '83, we better do one for
Gotta do
State.
one too, yeah.
And they were cool songs.
No, they were cool
They
songs.
even did one for Duke in '86, even though they lost to Louisville.
Yes. So
Actually, Jeff Gravely edited that one. Well, I will tell you, Joe, the '83 State thing was the most amazing story I think I was ever a part of.
Okay.
That was I call it my greatest day in television. It was April 5th, the day after the championship game.
Mm-hmm.
We did a 30-minute special that we put together. And also, we covered the airport. We covered Reynolds Coliseum. When they and here's something that was really cool. So we're at the airport. It was Charlie Gaddy and myself, and the airport was not like it is now. You could just kind of walk on out to the to the runway and what have you. So we're there, TVD's there, and so we're both shooting the airplane coming in. Coming into TVD's shot was me shaking hands with Jim Valvano and pointing to our place over there, could he come and be interviewed by Charlie and me? And so TVD's camera follows me and Coach Valvano walking over to Charlie Gaddy.
there's a fatigue to 1983, I think, because of what's, the current state of basketball at NC State. However, I don't think people quite understand why it still resonates. And I know there's been a 30 for 30 documentary about it, but like locally, just how... For me to see an entire city get behind something, having been in this market, was actually 2006 for the Stanley Cup.
Right.
When the Carolina Hurricanes won the Stanley Cup, I had never seen this area get behind something the way that it did.
Right, because it was everybody's team.
Everybody's team, right? There was no weird like Carolina fans being upset or State fans being upset or any of that stuff. Everybody got behind it. But, as a TV station that's based in Raleigh, literally across the street from NC State.
Across the street, right.
Yeah, I mean, I could see why that impacted things a little bit differently.
Well, and also this was an underdog State team, and people tend to like the underdogs. Mm-hmm. And Coach Valvano was such a charismatic person, and Derek Wittenberg, Sidney Lothar, Bailey were good guys. I mean, they were a bunch of good guys who just kind of, and people liked the way they fought. I think a lot of Carolina and Duke fans were pulling for. Now, you won't find, I'm not sure how many State fans were pulling for Carolina in '82, but I think a lot of Carolina fans may have pulled for State in '83 just because this was such a likable team.
Maybe that was the case. And we'll close on this. You have a 45-year career at WRAL, and you've seen the evolution of the market and how there's been more people from outside the area moved here over time, and it's kind of changed the dynamic of how people root for things. But do you feel, or did you feel, because I think you officially retired in 2016. I think the last time you actually did anything in front of a microphone was with us, right?
With you and Adam.
Okay.
June 6, 2016.
How do you remember that?
I got to remember all kinds of things. Now, I don't remember what I did yesterday, but I remember that stuff.
No, I remember why we talked to you, but I couldn't remember the day or any of that stuff. So
but I think how many radio shows you've done since. That's the only one I did.
True. No. You would hang out with Mark and Mike.
But that's the only one I've done in the last 5.5 years.
Fair enough. Do you think that the dynamics of North Carolina and NC State, and to a certain extent Duke, eventually kind of through osmosis get to people who live here for a little bit longer time?
I hope so.
Okay.
I think you can adopt a team like that. Having grown up in eastern North Carolina, I grew up on the ACC. I used to go out in my backyard, and I'm Ray Reeve. I'm the announcer and all 10 players recreating ACC basketball games. And a funny story is I met Ray Reeve for the first time on February 4th, 1961, which is the famous Duke-Carolina fight game with Art Heyman, Donnie Walsh, yes. Larry Brown. I was there. And at halftime, we were out at the corridor at then Duke Indoor Stadium, and Mr. Reeve was out there. And my mother, who's never met a stranger, went up and introduced herself and introduced me. And 10 years later, Ray Reeve would hire me.
Hey, it's a small world, connections and everything else.
It's pretty cool.
Hey, look, as a geek out moment on my end, when Adam Gold and I eventually got acquired by Capital Broadcasting, and the first time I actually went over.
And players to be named later.
And some players to be named later, yes. The first time I went over to Western Boulevard to go to the television station for a meeting was a pretty surreal moment because I've been watching you on television for a very long time. I'd seen Jeff Gravely on television for a very long time. Shout out to Greg Fischel, huge celebrity as the weatherman. I was like, whoa, like those types of things. So for you, having that same kind of moment to be hired, I'm saying this in a way that might be a little too flowery for your liking, but you go on to become the institution yourself.
I should be in an institution.
No. Instead, we got you in the Hall of Fame. That's the more important part. So I appreciate your time and a little trip down memory lane because I do think.
Do you remember the first time I met you?
Actually, I don't. Now you're going to tell me that you remember.
I think it was a football game at Kenan Stadium in 2004.
Okay.
And you were sitting there, and I didn't know who you were, but I thought you may be Joe Ovies.
Uh-huh.
And I said, aren't you Joe Ovies who works for 850 The Buzz? I said, I'm Tom Suitor.
Yeah, okay, yes. I remember this because my worry when you came up to me was, am I being too loud with the Stringer updates? Because in 2004...
Oh, no, the Stringer updates are great.
Okay, so for context purposes, there was a time where people would go to a press box and you'd call into ESPN radio.
I always thought that was kind of funny hearing everybody, hello, everybody, I'm...
Right, and that's what I would do. I'm a young guy. I'm basically making part-time money at this point. So yes, I would call into ESPN radio, Fox Sports Radio, Sporting News Radio, things like that. Gilio, who's my co-host now, he didn't know who I was at that time. He would get so annoyed at me. He's like, who's this jackass in the back talking about, Phillip Rivers, something. Tom, I appreciate it. Everything was great.
Thank you, Joe.